That spark of innovation, it's just waiting for the perfect combination of tools and talent to bring it to life. Welcome to Pitch, Build, Scale. I'm your host, Chris Fanchi, a recovering startup founder, veteran SaaS marketer, turned dev tech enthusiast and growth specialist. Each episode, we connect with the builders, the visionaries, and the problem solvers who are redefining what's possible with today's technology and pioneering the websites, apps, and software products of tomorrow. These are the conversations that transform how we build, how we sell, and how we scale technology businesses in a world where the tech evolves by the minute. Ready to stay ahead of the curve? This is Pitch, Build, Scale. Hello and welcome to today's episode. We have a very exciting guest. For those of you just joining the podcast, we are Big North Marketing and specialize in helping dev shops and SaaS companies scale their revenue. So if you want to learn how to take your SaaS or dev business to the next level, make sure to stick around. And if you're interested in a free growth consultation, just drop the word growth in the DMs. We're really excited to have today's guest, Tony Chan, CEO and co-founder of CloudForecast, a tiny seed-backed SaaS helping engineering teams easily understand and socialize AWS cloud costs. Tony brings a unique lens on bootstrapping, product-led growth, and sustainable SaaS economics, and he's built something special by focusing on trust, simplicity, and capital efficiency. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Chris. I'm really excited to be able to share our story and be able to share kind of our experience and what we've learned. It's just such a journey of just lots of failures, a lot of setbacks, but that's kind of like the startup life of just things you have to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get started by just learning a little bit about your journey. Where did you start? What first pulled you into tech and eventually led you to into launching this company?
Yeah, absolutely. So this journey is going to go back like 15 years when I first graduated out of college and looking for a job. And I started working at this Y Combinator-backed company called Perfect Audience at that time. And it was a small $1 million raise company, ad tech startup. And that's where I met my co-founder, Francois. That business focused on retargeting. If you're not familiar with the ad world, what it does is, like, let's say you go to Toys R Us website, you leave Toys R Us, and then you all of a sudden see Toys R Us ads following around the internet. So we were very early players at that time in terms of being a independent company and not part of like the ad networks like Google. And we provided that service for a lot of small, medium-sized businesses. But at the time, as mentioned, and that's where I met Francois, my current CTO, and all the travel from Chicago to San Francisco, even living in San Francisco, I spent a lot of time with Francois, hung out with him late nights in the office, trying to make things happen, trying to build the company. We're both very early employees. We're a lot younger. I like to joke we were naive as well. We just didn't know any better. Like, I slept on the couch. We just like worked late, 10 p.m., 11 p.m. And that's where we just built the friendship of just building startups and building companies. And that's where I learned a lot of my experience. I was, just out of college, and where I learned, what it means to build a company. Even though I wasn't a founder, I worked closely with who is currently a YC partner, the founder at the time, Brad Flora, and I just watched him and just learned from him on how to build the company. Kind of like on the side, though, as we're building the company, Francois was on the tech side, and he was racking up a really big AWS bill. He was standing up servers all across the world. We had to win what they call ad auctions in milliseconds. So I think the peak of our company, we had like 15 people, and we were about 8 figures in annual run rate at that time. And we were racking up like a 6-figure AWS bill. At that time, too, it's like they were using actually one of our competitors now that's been acquired, they were using a free tool or a lightweight free tool to help. It was just a simple email where it's like, hey, this is how much you're spending on AWS. Are there any areas where you might be wasting money or you might have some overruns? And it was nice and free. And all of a sudden, that company, when they raised VC money, decided to axe it. And they came back to us and it's like, hey, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. Francois, in his mind, was like, okay, that sucks. We're not going to use it. But, if I were to start my own startup a few years later, that's an idea that I'm going to continue to do and wanted to execute on. So we went about our ways. The company got acquired in 2016. We worked for the acquiring company for a few years. Francois went to Twitter. I stayed on board. I think at some point of our careers, him at Twitter, at the current company, like, hey, I think we're ready to start our own business and start this, or maybe do a side hustle. And that's where CloudForecast came in, right? I think it naturally made sense because AWS, Francois, that's his domain knowledge and what he knows best. He can talk about AWS like the back of his hand, knows all the surfaces. Sometimes his knowledge, I'm like, how do you even know that? So I think like that domain knowledge gave him the confidence, like, hey, this is an area where I want to build, and that's where I want to build a business. And then he brought me on board because I was very familiar with the business side. He's like, I don't want to talk to customers. I don't want to do this, do that. Like, hey, I'll let Tony handle all that. And that's how I became a co-founder. It's one of those things where it's like they reached out. I'm like, hey, cool, let's do it. I started as a side hustle, just a small business, launched on Hacker News, got some traction there. And then, as mentioned, we're independent, bootstrapped. Took a little bit money from Tiny Seed. I wouldn't say it was like a lot or significant just to be part of the program. But I think since the 6 years we've been in operation, outside of Tiny Seed funding, we've been completely bootstrap. I like to say customer funded.
Wow, that's really impressive. What was your background coming out of college?
Yeah, so I graduated with a marketing degree, but honestly, like I was number 2 or 3 employees, and it was like whatever Brad told me to do, I did it. Right? I remember saying to myself at the time early in career, I want to make myself so valuable to him that he can't fire me. Whether it's doing like his books and doing like all the financials, talking to customers, doing code outreach at the time, figuring out code outreach in time and growth, taking care of customers, expansion, all that. Anything needed, I did. So my background was more on the business operations side and just kind of like figuring things out as I went. And I was pretty young at the time. I didn't know much better other than, hey, like I have Google and I can Google all my problems and figure out what other people are doing and learn from people that are smarter than me.
So did you always expect to go into startups or small business right out of school, or was that a conscious decision, or did you try the corporate thing first at all?
I think it's one of those life moments where it kind of steers you towards that. I remember one of my potential first jobs was actually working in the advertising world. And at that time, it was after the recession, the Great Recession, and had my offer pulled. And I was like, well, now what? Right. And I think for me, it's like, okay, let's hustle and just try to find anyone like a job or whatnot. And I think that's where this opportunity came up. And I just remember like 4 or 5 weeks working to it. I barely knew Brad, and Brad was like, "Hey, I think I'm gonna move to Mountain View. You want to come with?" I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "I just bought a car in Evanston. You want to drive it 30 hours from Chicago to San Francisco?" I was like, "Okay." So like, it's like when you're in your early 20s, you're just naive like that, right?
Yeah.
But I think also, my dad was an entrepreneur too. He had restaurants while after moving to Chicago from New Hampshire as well. So I think just seeing that and seeing my dad do that, I think it's a natural fit. And apparently, my grandfather was an entrepreneur as well, and my aunt's an entrepreneur as well. Like my grandfather owned a bunch of businesses in China and Hong Kong, and my aunt owns a restaurant. So I think like just my upbringing, what I've seen and kind of like experience, it makes sense totally. And sometimes the world just pushes you towards those directions.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I did the startup thing when I was going through my MBA program,
Mhm.
and my co-founder and I would always joke that we learned more doing the startup than we did in the actual college program, because when you're in it and you're having to be hands-on, and like you said, wearing all these different hats, you're learning so many different skills and new skills. It really is a crash course in business.
Yeah, absolutely. And how I see it is, I think a lot of your upbringing too plays a role into it as well. Whether I remember having to work at my dad's restaurant when I was younger, a lot of my upbringing and growing up was just, hey, you had to figure it out. Like I grew up in the inner city, like you had to figure it out. You didn't have any choice. You don't have a choice. My parents were working, and I was like, well, there's no dinner. You figure it out, right? And I think a lot of those implicit experiences or the experience you have growing up easily translates to what you do as an entrepreneur on that side. Like for me, I don't feel, I mean, there is a gravity of risk that I deal with, but I just think about my upbringing growing up. I'm like, nothing like this for me, this is privilege, right? To be able to do my own thing, be able to run my own business, be able to stay at home, be able to run it independently, customer funded, and be able to support myself. So for me, I see this as a privilege to be able to do that. Like instead of waking up saying, "Oh, I have to do this," like I get to do this. And it's so exciting to be able to wake up and just be able to help people and be very customer centric and be able to work with really smart people.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're building CloudForecast, what was that aha moment that made you realize this thing actually had traction, it had wheels, and could be something that you could lean into and go forward with?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, it's hard to say because I remember after our second Y Combinator rejection, I think it was through our two Y Combinator rejections that we're like, hey, this is can be real, because a lot of their feedback was pretty practical and like, hey, we think you guys can do it, but we don't know if you're like fully in because you guys are working this on the side. So it forced Francois and I to quit our jobs, and we're like, well, okay, we're doing it. And I think the first two, like, I remember doing code outreach early on because like we had no money, and we're like, that's like the simplest form of outreach or growth that you can do is just literally reach out to people, code outreach, right? Like, yes,
Mhm.
it's a lot of work, and there's a manual process behind it. Now it's a lot more automated with so many more tools. But I think within like the first 60 days, I landed like $1,000 a month user, and it was like our biggest user. And then Francois was like, holy crap, this works. And this was like with 20 emails. So we're like calculating in our heads, we're like, well, 20 emails, we got one response. Like, oh my gosh, we're going to make millions of dollars. But you know how it never really works like that.
Yeah.
But that kind of sets you on a path of like, okay, you got one customer. Through that one big customer, there was like a lot of features that we did not have that they were asking for. So Francois was just like hustling and building features they were asking for. And then 2 months later, we closed them. And that from there, you just really have to think, okay, there's this one customer that looks like this and acts like this and has this problem. There has to be three or four more. And from that three or four more, it goes to another five more, to another five more, and so on. So I think within getting rejected from Y Combinator, getting their feedback, quitting our jobs with literally no revenue at all, and then like just getting lucky and just being really naive with that, just kind of like, hey, there's some potential traction. But it's like one of those things, it's like unless you really try and do it, you really don't know, right?
Mhm.
Obviously our growth has not been like, okay, 20 emails, we get one customer, right? But it did kind of give us the confidence, like, hey, we're doing something right here, and we're solving a problem that's worth solving.
Yeah. So what does CloudForecast look like today in terms of team structure, company size, things like that?
Yeah, so we're still small and nimble. As mentioned, we're still independent, bootstrap, customer funded. The problems we're solving are a lot more complex than we did early on. I think early on we definitely did had a lot more startups, like small businesses, I would say spending 25, $50,000 a month on AWS. The problems for them, it's a lot different. Whereas now we're working with mid-market, high-growth startups, big complex organizations, 1,000, 2,000 employees, large engineering teams. And the problem they're looking for is like, hey, how do I make my engineers or create ways to ensure my engineers cared about AWS costs? How do we build reports that surfaces monthly cost to the FP&A team or the C-level executives? What does that look like? So what we went from solving small startups, 25 to 50 employees, now large organizations, more complex features, more advanced features. Like we're building an Azure tool. So we're working with companies that might be spending AWS plus Azure or just AWS. So it's definitely a lot different. Team structure, we're still lean, very small. Francois and I are the main players. And then we have a senior engineer as well, churning out code. Then we have about maybe 15 independent contractors that we can turn on and off and ramp on and off, depending on the projects or focus that we have for that. And they go from UI UX design to customer success to partnerships to growth to admin things. So like for us, we do have like a strong support of contractors that we trust and that we rely on. And I think that's what you need to do as a independent startup that's customer funded.
Yeah, definitely. So what does your ideal customer look like today?
Yeah, our ideal customers, we like to say are mid-market high growth startups. So not quite like Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, but a step below. They're spending north of six figures a month on AWS. The people that we generally talk to first are director, manager, head level, and they are very, very technical. So a lot of it's DevOps, SRE, IT, engineering managers, and they've been voluntold that, hey, you're managing AWS costs now on top of your other millions of responsibilities. And that's where they come to us, and that's the problem we solve, and that's where our ideal customers. And a lot of our customers naturally sit in California, New York. That's where a lot of those types of companies live and have people under. So that's like, and I think that's really important with growth, is understanding who your ideal customer is, right? And defining that. And that can evolve every 6 months or 1 year. But the only way you can evolve it is if you talk to your customers, right? And that from there, when you talk to your customers, then you can really go crazy on like, okay, what are some growth initiatives that you need to think about or can think about, or how to do it? Like without that foundation, it's really hard to figure out what to do.
So you mentioned you started sending cold emails. I assume your marketing and sales efforts have matured a bit since then. What are you guys doing now to bring in new clientele?
And I think it's challenging because it evolves. Like for us, like to be frank, we haven't found that one marketing channel that has really clicked for us. I would say it's a number of marketing channels that helps fill the pipeline here and there, and it's still really hard. And we still put in a lot of effort on some of those channels, right? And it hasn't been a channel where we're like, hey, we can throw money at it. So I think in that sense, it hasn't evolved. It's still very challenging. However, I think the difference of what I'm doing now versus later is I've gotten 5 or 6 years under my belt in terms of like these channels, whether it's code outreach, SEO content, or paid ads or partnerships. I know tooling, and I now I think, okay, what are some automated ways I can do that, from lead list building to, if I'm doing SEO content, okay, how can I make sure like keywords are embedded and it's SEO ready? Like I know more tooling, and I have more knowledge of like, okay, some of this process can be automated, and just the ability to hire people to do specific things in some of those channels, I think can help a lot as well.
So let's transition now a little bit into talking about the technology landscape as it is. You've been doing this company for 6 years. So even in that short period of time, there's been a lot of changes and disruption in the technology landscape. How has that change impacted you guys in terms of AI, automation, things like that, that are really maturing over the last 5, 6
Yeah.
years?
Yeah. I think I think AI is interesting, but I haven't found like a game changer tooling where it's like you can really rely on that. I think AI has made my life easier as a marketer, meaning, hey, if I need help with copy, or if I need help on a certain research project, or if I need help with, like today I was toying with like, okay, I have this list of company. Can you help me figure out, are these companies using AWS? Right? Like do some research for me. And it spits all that out, whereas that could be a manual process. So I think for me, it's been more of a supplemental tool and kind of speeds me up, especially if I'm like, crap, I need to do some copy for my website. Help me spit out some 5 ideas, and then from there I tinker it. That has turned into like manual work that I dread, and it can be a blocker for a lot of people, to like, okay, cool. That can really help spur your creative thinking or think of ways to do it. Another thing that's really helpful was like, we have a lot of customer interviews and jobs to be done interviews. And I put that all into a ChatGPT folder. And more often than not, I use that as a way to ask questions, right, about our customers and what we do. Or like, hey, I have this transcript of this customer interview I did. Please extract some of those information, right? Like, I think that's been incredibly helpful for me on that side. One of the tools I've really like that was not available 6 years ago is Clay. Just be able to create waterfalls and like processes to build lead lists. That has saved me tons of time. Like before, you like VLOOKUP, VLOOKUP this, VLOOKUP that, VLOOKUP here, scrape here, and just try to create this monstrous Frankenstein of a lead list. Like I would say Clay has more than paid for itself. They're not sponsoring this podcast, but it's been a reliant tool. It's like when you're doing cold outreach, lead list building is probably one of the takes up the most time in terms of like kind of doing things and just trying to figure out where the qualifications are.
Hmm.
Has AI made any impact on the product itself, what you're delivering for your clients?
Not yet. We haven't found like a game changer or like a use case that makes sense. I think a lot of our customers too, since they're a little bit more technical and like the data that we work with could potentially be I wouldn't say like super sensitive. It's like, I think they're very, very cautious about adopting. So we had AI tools, like our security reviews will be a lot harder, a lot more challenging as well. And it's still really expensive to run those jobs as well, right? So like for us, like we haven't found the economics that makes sense. Other, like everyone's like, oh, everyone just puts in a silly chatbot and you chat with the chatbot. But like, okay, like I'm not going to charge a customer $3,000 a month additional for a chatbot that that you can do in a lot of other ways. So I think for us, we just haven't found it what that could mean. I know that our developers use that to help them write code a little bit, to kind of help them out if they're stuck on something. That's all I know in terms of like on the technical side in terms of AI, from what we've seen. But in terms of business, we haven't found a solution that's like, hey, that makes total sense.
So how have you seen the cloud infrastructure landscape change over the last few years since you got into this to today?
Yeah, I think the big thing is more people care about their infrastructure and cloud costs more today than before. Like I think 6 years ago was like, even 10 years ago, like 6 to 10 years ago, 5 to 10 years ago, it was more of like an underground thing. Like it wasn't really talked about too much. And if you look at the search volume, it's exploded the last 2 or 3 years because a lot of people are moving to a cloud. Adoption cloud is skyrocketing, especially with leveraging AI and um, LLMs as well. So I think it's more top of mind, not only for engineers, but for business folks as well, FP&A team, right? How to build that forecasting into their models that they have. It is a very big part of their books every month now. And I think not only understanding on like high level, but like the technical details. There's some FP&A people that are really solid that just understand the intricacies of AWS and all the services, how it's charged and all the economics of it. And I think that's been like the biggest change, is the awareness of cloud cost and how it impacts the company on that side.
Interesting. Would you say that's a result of increased knowledge about what's going on there? Or would you say that, particularly in the last couple of years, that it's related to economics and the economy and prices,
Yeah,
things
I
like
think
that?
with economy and economics, right? Our first biggest growth curve that happened was during COVID, actually, right? When people were tightening up the pocketbooks, people were like figuring out ways to save money, or like, hey, how can we reduce our costs? And the first place they went to was cloud costs, right? So I think that was like the impetus and the start of that conversation. And it just has exploded since, right? Like if you look at the last 5 years, there hasn't been really economically, like it just feels like we're on a big roller coaster, right? And like every few years it's like, okay, we need to look at this, we need to look at this. So I think COVID has really heightened the awareness for a lot of people of cloud costs and public cloud costs, from like the trends of I'm seeing on my side.
Okay. So looking back at your own business now, you mentioned forecasting being a big thing for cloud costs. When you're doing a bootstrapped business, how does forecasting and sustainable growth play in for you? And what are
Yeah,
you looking at
yeah,
for growth in the next year?
forecasting is tough. Like I joke that forecasting is like some kind of black magic wizardry and you're just like making up numbers as you go. And I think startups, like I think it's important to forecast and watch your cash flow 6, 12 months. But I also see that as a potential barrier where you're like planning so much where you're not really executing, right? So how I've done it, and Francois and I do it, we always plan in 6 month sprints and we always see things in 6 months. So right now we're in the middle of first half and I have a pretty good handle of what it looks like to the end of the year. And how does it look next year? I don't know. Like I think we'll still be in business, but I think it's hard. Like you shouldn't, like if you're planning 3, 5 years, like that's not a startup. Like in reality, how I see it is you never know if you have tomorrow with your startup. So you should be planning and executing like there's no tomorrow, right? But there's also the factor of like, hey, you should make sure you have a good cash flow, you're healthy. For us, it's always, we are default alive, meaning like we're profitable, everything covers our costs. I can go on vacation and things will still be okay, and like I can disappear, like not saying I would, things will still be okay, like, and that's a good place to be in, right? But it's also important, how do you balance that of like, okay, what are the bets that we should take this year, what are some bets that we should take in 6 months? And that comes with good planning, right? So we never plan hard on the product side or growth side beyond 6 months. Like I know what I'm going to do up to end of June, and then we'll review how things are, what are some levers, what things worked well, what didn't. And then, okay, another 6 month sprint is how we kind of think about it on our side.
So do you have any big wins or say North Stars that you're aiming for over the next 12 months?
I mean, for us, it's just like growth, 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 right? I think our North Star that we've been always trying to aim for since the start of the company is like, how do we find those marketing channels? So if I'm talking specific growth and growth channels of like North Stars that I'm aiming for, like where my efforts being put in or where my money is being put into right now is partnerships. Partnerships, whether it's working with VARs, resellers, tech resellers, or companies that are adjacent to what we do, not competitors. But like, for instance, we're working with a company called Prosperaps, and they automate a lot of the commitments within AWS. And instead of building ourselves, let's partner up with them, right? We have some customers that want something like that. And I don't think it's in our best interest to build something like that. We are good at what we do. So like, hey, let's work with Prosperaps, right? Let's bring more value to our users, or work with tech resellers, because I think the biggest hurdle that you can have with selling into engineering teams is the trust factor, right? So let's work with really strong resellers that know what we're doing or believe in what we're doing, that have a book of business that trust them, that might be able to help speed up some of those trust barriers that you're running into. So for us, it's like, okay, how do we unlock partnerships? How do we continue to push heavily in that? How do we continue to invest heavily in that? How do we yield growth from that as well? And that's been like our biggest effort right now and within CloudForecast.
Is there any interest or desire to eventually raise funding for scaling purposes, or are you comfortable pushing forward with what you've got?
We're pretty comfortable with pushing what we got. Like I would never say no to money, but it has to be on our terms and what we believe in. And it has to be from investors that make sense. For us, like we feel very much in the driver's seat of our business and what we do. Yeah, we have ups and downs or whatever, but we'll never say no to it if the terms are right, if it helps us take money off the table for us a little bit, and then it can drive growth. But we have always seen raising money as more of a strategic initiative, hey, we are growing so fast, like we need money to help sustain the growth. Or it's like, hey, we've unlocked this like growth channel that is like just pouring money in for us. We need to raise money. Or like we have the strategy that we believe in, we should raise money. And I think that's, in my opinion, the best way to raise money as a founder, rather than raising money to survive, if that makes sense. Right.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
I don't want to chase the next, like, oh, I need this money to, survive and have a job. Right. So I think for us, it's like having really good financials, having really good discipline is really important to us. But that comes with like, okay, when I raise money, it's going to be for strategic reasons rather than just to raise so we can get to the next level, right? I don't want that stress in my life. I think I'm a type of person where um I lean heavily on feeling someone were giving me money, I would have a lot of burden on my heart to ensure that I bring that value back on that side, right? And I enjoy that from working with a customer point of view. I can't imagine adding another third party to have that on my shoulders and the weight on my shoulders to deal with that on that side. So
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily just internal pressure. I mean, if you bring on investors, there's going to be external pressure. They're going to be demanding things. There are going to be certain expectations.
yeah, exactly. So, like I said, we'll never say no, right? But it has to make sense, has to fit in our strategy, our vision, and like the type of investors we want to work with as well. So we get a lot of cold emails and we've turned down money as well. Like it just didn't make sense. So I think for us, it just has to be a good fit and what makes sense for our business. And also the big one that Fritz always says, like, what makes sense for our customers. Cause we do feel very we're very customer oriented. So it's like if it undercuts what we do for our customers, like that's a no for us.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't want to bring on money that tells you to pivot, right?
Right.
To change your offering.
Pivot or like raise the cost of like 100x and burn bridges. For
Yeah.
us, it's like as an independent bootstrap business, like our number one differentiator is our customers and a relationship with our customers, right? And that's foundational for us, and that leads to so many other things on that side.
Yeah. Yeah. How has it been balancing that transition? Because you said you started out in somewhat working with somewhat smaller businesses, and now you're into the big enterprise space. Have you been able to maintain a balance and continue serving both spaces?
Honestly, not as well as we can. I think we introduced a free plan to be able to service folks on the startup side, but our business in terms of like our revenue and where a lot of our features are going to be with our biggest enterprise customers. I think the problem and like the thing that we're seeing too is like AWS is getting really good at their tooling, which services a lot of smaller startups. And you're like, hey, I don't really need something like CloudForecast. Like I'm good with what AWS provides as well. So it's also like type of problem we're solving as well that makes sense within our space.
Mhm.
But we do have a free plan that services, but I would say majority of the features we build and the problems and our revenue comes from our biggest customers on that side.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
But it's definitely changed, right, in terms of how you approach the process. Because with smaller customers, it's like, well, you could get tons of customers, right? But you can't charge that much to get to 1 million in annual run rate, or you get smaller amount of customers but charge a lot more, right? So I think for us, it's like learning the sales process, procurement process, security process, ensuring that everything we put in, the effort we put into kind of figure out what those processes are, like makes sense in terms of ROI perspective, because that's all time, right? Like
Mhm.
you don't want to go through like a 3 month procurement security process and charge them $99 a month, right? Like just does
Right.
not make sense economically. So for us, it's like, well, we have to charge more, right? Because it's a different level of service that you're providing for those bigger customers.
Yeah, definitely. So, what would you say a breakout year would look like for you? If everything went perfectly, what would the next 12 months look like?
A breakout year is, hey, a marketing channel, we just throw money and it's like just killing it, right? Just killing it and just doing really well. I think I mentioned this, like we're still, I mean, we're default alive, we're good, right? But everything just feels still a lot of effort, right? And we put in a lot of work. And sometimes it does get discouraging because like the effort in terms of the yield does not equate evenly, right? It feels like I'm putting like 100 effort and like I get 10% yield in some
Mm,
ways.
mm,
So I think like when that moment comes where I'm like, don't have to put too much effort and get a lot of yield, or I put in a lot of effort and it equates to the same yield, right? I think that's what a breakout year would look like for me, right? I think Paul Graham says it the best, like like do things that don't scale, and we're still very much in that, right? Even though we've been in business for 6 years, that hustle and like focusing on our customers and just like every day it's not guaranteed or tomorrow's not guaranteed is still very much in our DNA. Can be very tiring, and some days we're like, oh my gosh, why do we do this? But I think we always have to look at the bigger picture and like, okay, this has been really rewarding for us. So I think the moment where the effort equates to what we get out of it will be a breakout year for us, and we can kind of breathe a sense of relief for us.
No, that's fantastic. Well said. So, Tony, this has been awesome. I really appreciate the time. Very interesting conversation, really insightful. Thanks for sharing all that. And where can our listeners find you and learn more about Cloud Forecast?
Yeah, absolutely. You can either email me. I'm always happy to chat with folks that want to learn a little bit more about growth. Like I know a little bit of everything, so I'm more than happy to chat and give feedback. So you can find my email at tony@cloudforecast.io. Or if you have a terrible AWS bill and you can use some help on it, you can also email me, or you can find our website at cloudforecast.io as well.
And thanks for joining me on the show today. And thanks to everyone listening. Please be sure to subscribe, leave us a review. It helps us be found by the algorithms. And as always, keep pitching, keep building, and keep scaling. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pitch, Build, Scale. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast provider so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.